Hello, everyone, and welcome to our show, MSL Insights. Today, we're going to be discussing the evolution of KOL speaker training in the new virtual world. My name is Samuel Dyer, and I'm the chairman of the board for the Medical Science Liaison Society. And for those on the line that don't know, the MSL Society is a 501c3 nonprofit organization and the only organization dedicated to advancing the global MSL profession by helping MSLs and managers become more effective in their careers. We accomplish this by offering numerous unique resources, including the first and only board certification for MSLs and MSL leaders. In simple terms, like any other certification, it allows experienced MSLs and managers to validate their skills and knowledge of the MSL profession based on criteria determined by a large number of independent MSL and medical affairs leaders from some of the top pharmaceutical companies. Anybody interested in learning more about the board certification for MSLs or MSL leaders, you can see the URL there on the bottom of the screen. We encourage you to go check that out. I also, as a reminder, nominations for the 2020 MSL of the Year Awards are still open, but all applications need to be completed within 5 days or next Wednesday, September 9th. This year, there's 8 categories, and evaluating the submissions will be 12 highly experienced MSL leaders who are volunteering a substantial amount of time to go through all of the submissions. The awards are completely free to enter and to win, and you do not need to be an MSL Society member to participate or to win. We'll send a link to everyone to learn more, but the URL there is on the bottom of the screen. So before we get started, I just want to go over a few quick technical details. As participants, you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. However, in your control panel, you'll notice you have a question panel. We encourage you to type your comments or questions into the question panel, and throughout the discussion, we'll try to address as many relevant questions as possible throughout the show. We've also been asked by several people if this will be recorded. Yes, we are recording the show, and it will be available on the MSL Society website for everyone very soon. We just need a few days to put it together and get it up on the website. We also want to thank H1 for sponsoring and partnering with us for today's show. They do a lot of really cool things for the MSL community and provide some great tools. We encourage you to go check that out. There's their URL there on the screen. So that brings us to today's show. Today, we're, of course, going to be discussing the evolution of KOL speaker training in the new virtual world. For today's show, we've had hundreds of MSLs, managers, directors, VPs, and various other roles from over 31 countries register. So it's clearly an important topic. And even during the COVID-19 pandemic, KOL speaker training still remains an important value that MSLs provide to KOLs and their companies. However, there are some unique challenges, and so we will discuss how to address some of these challenges and solutions during the show today. So joining me today to discuss this important topic is Dr. Linda Traylor, who is the VP of Clinical Development and Medical Affairs at Biodesix. And Mark Taylor is back joining us, who is the Executive Client Director from H1. Linda, Mark, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much, Sam. It's great to be here.
Great to be here.
I want to start off the show with sharing the results of one question from the survey that we offered leading up to the show today. And we asked 140 MSLs and managers, is preparing or training KOLs or other HCPs to be speakers a valuable use of an MSL's time? The results are interesting. 91% said yes, and 9% said no. Linda, I'm going to start with you. Are you surprised at the results of the survey? Is it what you would expect? What is your reaction to this?
You know, as we've been discussing, I'm not really surprised by the numbers. I fully anticipated that the majority of answers would be yes, because I've worked for many companies and know that most MSL teams do in fact take a lead role in training speakers, depending on the context, of course. But I've also been part of companies that spread it out across multiple functions. And in fact, some companies I'm aware of that don't use MSL are either too new in the process of developing speakers or speaker bureau, and or an MSL team to even support this. So I would say I'm not completely surprised. These numbers look about right given what I know from my experience.
Absolutely. And by the way, for everybody listening, we will be publishing all these survey questions and the results soon as a part of a report. We'll have it up on the MSL Society website for members, and we'll be sharing that soon. Mark, glad to have you back. You have a diverse background, and you guys are working with a lot of different companies, and your perspective here today is really valuable in that you're seeing this from a lot of different perspectives. When you see this, the results of this survey, what's your reaction to this?
Yeah, I see that. I would imagine that a large number of medical affairs leaders find the training to be really valuable. So I'm not surprised by the numbers. I'd be shocked if it was the other direction. As a client director, I speak to a lot of different large organizations, tier 1 and tier 2 pharmaceutical organizations and biotechs. And the anecdotal feedback that I'm hearing is that training of speakers by MSLs for regional and local events is really critical. With more events being virtual these days, companies have more budgets to spend on events because there's no travel cost, there's no big display cost at the conference centers, and there is no printed material cost. So therefore, they can afford to do more at the regional and local level. And I think I'm hearing that the responsibility for hosting these events really fall to the local MSLs and the local leaders. And if that MSL or medical affairs director wants a good event, then it's really in their best interest to train their speakers. I'm seeing that MSLs are finding a valuable use of technology and data to help with that training. They use the data to allow them to do deeper research on thought leaders in their area. With that data, they can research on recent publications that a KOL has done, any clinical work that KOL or thought leader has done, and whether or not that KOL has a social media following and what that influence is. And then more importantly, if that thought leader has done speaking or presenting recently. So all that data allows that MSL to understand another important aspect. It allows the MSL to understand if that scientific communication message that they're putting out there is hitting home with the KOL that they might want to speak. And if that is apparent in the work that a KOL might have been doing, either through publications or other scholarly data. And so what I'm seeing is that, and what I'm hearing anecdotally is that the quality of a strong regional event can come from an MSL's homework when they start to work and start to train that KOL on the latest messaging around a drug, a new indication, or new data. To kind of come full circle, yes, I think having technology and data and the ability for an MSL to train a potential KOL or thought leader speaker is very much a priority and very valuable. It saves time, it increases preparation, and it really streamlines that preparation time for both the MSL and the KOL. So I think it's a great use of time for them.
Yep. Yeah, thank you for that detailed response. I think that's great, and I think one of the things, and Linda, would you agree with this? That when I see the challenges that MSLs are facing, and as you know, we do a lot of surveys, and we've done a lot of surveys during the COVID-19 pandemic around activities of MSLs. I mean, access has clearly been an ongoing challenge, certainly more in the beginning than it is now, but I see speaker training as an opportunity for MSLs to demonstrate and contribute value. It's another way to add value to KOLs in their companies. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree, and I think it's really from two perspectives. One, the technology and how to adapt, and then two, how do you adapt to a broader audience that is probably going to include a significantly more diverse crowd than would be expected in a live presentation. So I think the value is prepping them for not knowing as much about the audience as they would normally, not having the audience feedback real time as you do in live, and then presenting the data in a more engaging story-like presentation to keep people engaged, because you really don't know. So you have to assume that there's some level of inattentiveness in that environment. So you really have to prepare the speaker for a completely different paradigm that we'll talk, I guess, as we go throughout this
Yep.
hour in more detail. But yeah, I think the value is now beyond just providing a fair and balanced look at the data. It's really helping them navigate this new environment, which many of them will not have had exposure to or experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess the first place I want to start with both of you is, and you've already kind of touched on that a little bit, Linda, and I definitely want you and Mark to both kind of take this first thought of, so here we are in the pandemic. Obviously, things have changed. The speaker training obviously has changed. Linda, I'm going to start with you. Can you talk about the major challenges for speakers who are accustomed to live presentations, right? And even, being trained live. Um, and maybe with that, talking about the major challenges, maybe give us some best practices that you would recommend the MSLs and managers listening to this call right now who are on the air with us. I mean, what are some of the things that are working? So major challenges, and what's working.
Absolutely. I think the first and foremost, the major challenge is some of your most dynamic speakers in a live audience situation may not be your best speakers in a virtual situation, because a lot of times the dynamic speakers really feed on the audience responses and know how to navigate and get audiences involved. And those who are excel in that environment will have a challenge in the virtual environment, because you just don't have that audience feedback. You don't get to see the faces. You don't get to see if people are yawning or whether or not they're paying attention, or even in front of the computer, let alone paying attention. So you have to be mindful that just because somebody is a great speaker in a live event doesn't necessarily translate to the virtual world. So you have to revamp your training efforts in the context of an unknown audience paradigm. I would then say practice. So the best practices is don't assume these great speakers are going to naturally migrate to the virtual speaking environment. You have to have multiple run-throughs, not only to go through the technology. I would almost separate out the two aspects of it. Let's first have a get together, short 15-30 minutes, to just walk through the technology, practice passing things off if you have to, practice going on mute, unmuting, asking questions, whoever your facilitator is, and make sure that they're prepped and ready to go. If there is no I've had a situation where there was really no means to put the facilitator and the speaker in their own private room in a panelist room before the webinar launched, and we were speaking privately before the event that the entire audience was hearing. And those are the things that you have to be mindful of when you're on, depending on what platform you're using, is what are the capabilities and how to navigate that. So that's the first aspect. Then you obviously have to have a run through of the data and the slides, and what do we do in case, you got to plan out technology breakdowns. Let's say the computer goes dead. He didn't have it plugged in. He or she didn't have it plugged in. I mean, we've experienced it all. And so you have to be ready with backup plans that you normally don't think about in a live presentation.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Mark, any thoughts on, the companies you're working with? I mean, what are you hearing? What are you guys seeing? Major challenges and maybe some best practices?
Right. Well, I think as all of us are adapting to this new virtual reality that we have, it's the little things that I see the most successful companies prepare for, and they fall in line with some of the things that Linda talked about in terms of considering the small things that can go wrong. One of the large organizations that I've been working with are putting on a number of different therapeutic area themed conferences and virtual webinars. And some of the things that I hear them talk about are around three major themes. So the first one is technology. So, really helping KOLs learn how to use the technology of conference technology that they're probably not familiar with. A lot of these HCPs and opinion leaders are used to doing presentations, but maybe some of them haven't had to do Zoom or Microsoft Team conferences because they're physicians or they're professors. The professors have had to adapt, but maybe the physicians haven't had to. So I think making sure that clients understand how to use that technology efficiently and effectively is one of the first themes that they talk about. Another one that's really important, presentation skills. Just presentation and preparation of using notes and how to use conference technology when you want to present your information. Knowing what you look like when you're on Zoom or Microsoft Teams when the computer is only 2 to 3 meters from your face. It's a different environment for some of these physicians and healthcare practitioners that are used to having big stages and being, 25 meters away from people. In this new environment, they've got to understand that their face is right inside the camera and what they look like. And because some of the KOLs won't be able to leverage a audiovisual team as they would in a normal conference, they need to be trained and prepared to be able to speak to that. And a lot of the large organizations that I speak with, they've got digital leaders on staff. And those digital leaders are taking the time to teach the KOLs how to use 2 different screens to refer to notes, how to share their laptop content in a smooth and an effective manner so that their message gets across effectively. And then the third theme is just around maybe imagination and ingenuity. I've heard a lot of my top clients who work with KOLs really start to think about what type of format is actually going to grab and hold people's attentions. We, as Linda said, we all have distractions when we're virtual. We can be petting the dog and get caught up in that. We can be typing on and using our computer for something else. We can get distracted. So it's really up to the MSL team and the organization to kind of think about the type of experience that they want to create so that all these quarantine individuals can still learn, stay connected, and still grow through the content that a KOL or MSL team is trying to present. So those are some of the three themes that I've heard about that seem to be most important and are kind of different in terms of the challenges that they have to face in getting speakers accustomed to these live presentations in this virtual world.
Yeah, I think these are both, all the tips and suggestions both you and Linda had given are excellent. And I think one of the things that we're hearing from the teams that are being really successful at this, and I think just to summarize a lot of what you guys were talking about is preparation, having a plan, and certainly excuse me, practicing with the technology. And so I think that's really good. I think I'm going to jump into live questions from the audience. I want to take a good one here. And this is from George. And I'm going to start with you, Linda. George is asking, being speakers training an important, so maybe saying being speaker training is an important investment of MSL time. What are the metrics that you use to measure the benefit of this to the medical or to the business? How are you guys looking at that, Linda?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. And I think it's an ever evolving a topic for a lot of companies, even in, pre-virtual world, is how to measure success non-commercially of speaker events. And the most common techniques are obviously audience surveys, audience participation, audience questions that you get, the number of requests that you get. So there's a lot of measurable computer-based metrics that can be used to evaluate how impactful the webinar was. I think the follow-up surveys, follow-up engagement that MSLs can have with people that they know who participated in the webinar events is another means by which you can evaluate your reach. But everything's going to come down to what the objective of the webinar was. And if it was general education, there are ways in which you can evaluate and engage the audience attendees to find out if it was meaningful and whether or not it could be improved. So that it gives the MSLs opportunity. And so that's one metric, is follow-up meetings that occur as a result from the webinar, responses to surveys, and whether or not you had questions that were asked during the presentation are some metrics you can use. But the follow-up is typically the best venue to get good feedback and metricize the event.
Yeah, and are you, before I jump over to you, Mark, Linda, are you guys using anything like traditional metrics like number of training programs per month, or any of those types of KOL engagement metrics for the speaker training? I don't know if that was part of what George was asking, but I'm just curious.
We're a smaller company, so we don't have a lot of formal metrics that we use. It's mostly post-event follow-up that
Yep.
we use to measure success. And so it's general one-on-one engagement with attendees that we look at, as well as, there's always going to be a commercial component to a lot of the webinars we do. So certainly the impact of new customers and the general commercial metrics that can be used as well. Because clearly, even if it is an education, disease state, non-commercial event, it usually is in the disease space in which you're working, and you can, if physicians and our attendees or healthcare providers find value in the data that you presented, it will show in their opinion on whether or not to use your product with their patients. That is an indicator, even though the sales sides look at the numbers, we look at it in terms of it resonated to the point that they took action. And so that is a metric that we would also look at.
Yeah, the taking action part, that's what's the outcome. Yeah, so
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mark, any thoughts on this? Maybe some of the companies you guys are working with, as it relates to, same question, metrics and outcomes?
Right. What I've heard from a number of companies, large and small, is that they expect us to be virtual probably for the next maybe 6 to 12 months. So they've decided to leverage new technology partners, from social media firms to data teams to their internal data science analysis, if the organization is large enough. And that gives them the capability to measure those online metrics that's important to them, whether it's views of a webinar, whether it's the reach afterwards, whether it's a click-through per a follow-up link, or prior to the conference or the webinar. Click-throughs is something else that is another tool that they measure. Linda talked about audience views, so we can also do things with audience views and follow up with surveys, as we might do here with the MSL Society. I think the other key metric that MSLs and medical affairs directors and leaders use is meetings. the number of meetings that an MSL might be able to capture, whether it's a telemedicine meeting or I don't know if they're doing in person yet, but a virtual healthcare meeting with a MSL, either one that they haven't been able to capture before, or through the increase in the numbers on a quarterly basis, maybe based on the content of the event, and maybe asking the KOL directly, did you decide to meet with me, or was it impacted by the event that you attended? So I think there's a number of different ways that we can use technology and use data to do those metrics, whether they're internal or external. But I'm seeing more organizations saying, hey, the money that we were going to spend on going to a conference in Orlando and maybe spending $100,000 with a big setup, we could get away with spending $30,000 to $40,000 on hiring a technology firm to help us develop more metrics around the webinars that we're doing and do more webinars throughout the year. So that's the type of feedback that I'm seeing.
Yeah, and I think you both brought up a good point that, who cares how many of these things that you actually go to? The end result, I mean, talk about metrics, is outcomes or impacting some sort of change in KOL behavior, right? Or ways that, other ways to measure that is, certainly access, right? So if you are even doing less of these or doing digital platforms, we're really concerned with the outcomes and the change that is a result of that. Linda, can you talk about, I want both of you to talk about, Mark, what you guys have seen, but Linda, what you guys are doing as it relates to, maybe you could quickly address and discuss modifying speaker training to adapt to the virtual environment. We talked a little bit about it, but is there anything specific beyond the tips and things that you've mentioned that you think are, maybe some aha moments or some things that you guys have not been successful at and maybe had to pivot and learn from?
Oh yeah, there is a growing list of things that are, to-dos and not to-dos that we are capturing. And I think a lot of this is not unique to us, but the things that you don't think about when you're presenting is if you're not looking directly into the camera, you're not looking at your audience. If you're looking at so setting up your camera to eye level or above so that you're not looking down at your laptop, so that the audience is not looking up at your nose. There are background challenges, lighting challenges. If you have light behind you, all you see is sort of this dark profile. If you have too much light in front of you and you're wearing glasses, there is a major reflection. If you do not know how to use your cursor or some of the tools to use as a pointer, a lot of times audiences can get lost, especially in the busy slides. If you have a busy background and you're in your office and you have all sorts of artwork and books and the audience is going to be focused on what's on your bookshelf, which can be okay, but if you want them to listen to you, you don't want them judging your book selection or your artwork yeah, exactly. And so there are so many things that we have come across that you just don't naturally think of. And so we, even at my company, our leadership team has gone through additional training in the virtual world, and the IT department has set us up with cameras and the appropriate audio devices that allow us to have a clear projection. And then the little things like understanding when you're on mute, when you're on double mute, how to get off mute, how to get off double mute. And that also we need to stop apologizing for the blasted double mute. Just get back on and get back into the presentation. It's funny, but at the same time, it gets old after a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how many times I've said, oops, sorry, on mute. Oops, sorry. If I could have $1 for every time I've said that in this 6 months, I would be $100. I could go out to dinner.
Yep. These are great. These are really good, and especially, it was funny. We actually did a global survey, and I think it was 27% or something like that. In the middle of the pandemic, that MSLs have never conducted a virtual engagement with a KOL. And that's interesting because if it's all brand new, these are things that you need to take into account. Forget the scientific exchange and knowing the data and preparing. You got to know all that. In addition, now we have some new elements.
Yeah.
Mark, anything that's come up or that you've seen with other organizations?
Right. Yeah. I think a major theme is similar to what Linda said. It goes under the heading of preparation and updates. With this new environment, I'm hearing a lot of companies that I work with are really making sure the MSL leaders are really asking the KOLs as one step is to send the slides to them prior to a webinar or presentation so they can review them and help them do editing and updates because, previously in person conferences, they have a chance to connect either the morning before or an hour or 2 hours before they go on, before KOL goes on. But now that you don't have that, I think an MSL team or leaders have to prepare for that and have to get those notes ahead of time. I think KOLs have to consider in this new digital world, they can't use the same content, the same text or slides that they used whether it was 10 or 5 years ago. I think graphics need to be updated, text needs to be modernized where applicable. I think the KOLs need to consider modernization of their content and maybe think about leveraging videos and images and certainly contemporary vernacular where it's appropriate so that they're current. I think now that we live in the world where there's so many TED Talks and virtual presentations that the healthcare world and world holistically has access to. If a KOL wants to stay on the speaker circuit, then they need to be more polished than they might have been, maybe just 3 or 4 years ago. I also see companies that request, as Linda said, that a KOL have some run-throughs or practice sessions so that a marketing or technology leader knows that the sound quality is strong. As Linda said, the background is appropriate. And if you have to put up one of those facades, whether they should do it or not. And in this remote world, we have to be conscious of KOLs making these changes. So I think these are some of the types of changes that I'm seeing, that I'm hearing about in terms of making sure that a speaker environment and a KOL has to adapt to this new virtual environment where they're maybe not used to it. And the MSL and the MSL leadership team has to think about that. If a particular speaker hasn't done a presentation in the last 12 months, 12 months ago today, they were in person. So they probably haven't had to use Zoom or anything yet. So they need to be prepared and think about that.
Yeah, these are all great tips, and I really like everything you guys said. And the one that I would just add to this is certainly a practice session and record it. Because if you feel like you're weird and awkward on video, well, guess what? You probably are coming across that way. So I mean, I think part of that is just practicing and being prepared. And you can get a family member also, or a friend, or maybe another MSL to do a practice session with you to see how you're projecting. I think all of that, test your equipment, get the lighting, get the camera set up. I mean, all of those things are really important elements that MSLs never had to be worried about and concerned with prior to this. So I think that's important.
Yes, and I think I'm sorry to interject, Sam, but I think the
Yeah,
most
please.
important aspect that you talked about was recording. I think all the different conference technology that we have now gives you the capability to record. It'll get sent to you in email and you can review it. I think that makes a big difference for those presenters who aren't used to this new environment. It gives them an opportunity to really see and understand what they sound like and modify if needed.
Yep, be polished. Mark, Linda, we are getting a lot of questions in chat. So here's what I want to do. I just want to do a bunch of these rapid fire. So we'll try to give quick responses to as many of these we can, because I know all of you listening want your questions answered as well. And I want you to get answers to those as well. So we'll try to do this just quick responses, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. Linda, I'm going to start with you. Jasmina has asked, could you give us examples of creative ways to engage audience in speaker training?
To engage, so you mean, so let me make sure I'm understanding the question. So wants to know how to train speakers to get creative for audience engagement. Is
I
that what
guess, and Jasmina, you could let me know if I didn't interpret this. The way I'm interpreting this is, could you give us some examples of creative ways to engage audiences? So I guess what she's asking is creative ways that MSLs can engage with the KOLs during speaker training. Jasmine, if I didn't get that, tell me, but we'll take it from that angle.
in terms of, so I'm interpreting that as while you're training the speakers to
Yep.
creative things that you could use. I think technology is evolving very quickly. And so I think as you're training speakers for presentations, you can get them engaged by allowing each of them to present something on their computers and navigate the presentation. There are a lot of new, unique survey tools that are available that you could do real time that allow the audience to answer survey questions, and you can show the results real time. MSL Society has done that many times on their presentations, and you can do that during speaker training if you're training a large number, just so that they can get used to it, but also getting a sense of them, if you want to ask awkward or challenging questions to the speaker group, you can allow them to answer anonymously in that way if you're looking for unique feedback. So I hope I'm addressing the questions, but it just depends on if you've got a large group versus one or two, then it's just more of a one small group roundtable type of discussion. As you're training them, always demonstrate how to do it correctly, and then allow them the opportunity to repeat what you've done, or you want to set them up for success. Training is never about setting somebody up to be embarrassed or be in an awkward situation. You want to demonstrate what good looks like. You want to set them up for success so that they're not worried about the technology piece, if they're really focusing on the message that you want them to tell. So setting them up for success means getting past all of the barriers to the technology issue that would keep them from being able to deliver the exact message you want them to.
Excellent. Mark, any one tip that you can give for creative ways to engage with during speaker training, MSL to the KOL?
Well, yeah, but one quick tip. I would say that you have to, MSLs and medical affairs leaders have to let their speakers know that they should embrace the awkwardness. There's going to be some less than optimal moments during any presentation, and that the speaker should just, if they can, embrace the awkwardness, let it roll off their back. There's going to be technology glitches. There's going to be times when they've been on mute and they've been talking for about 10 seconds, or and they didn't know it. There's going to be knocks on the door. There's going to be the dog that barks. You just have to prepare the presenter to just go with the flow, and I think that allows for the presenter to have some authenticity. So embrace the awkwardness is one thing, part of the training I would suggest.
Yep. Okay. Excellent. Excellent. We've got several questions around this whole idea of so Alan has asked, and we had a few others ask this similar question. Alan asked, do the speakers have an opinion on the value or negative attributes for having HCPs pre-record their lecture as long as live Q&A is offered? Linda, have you guys dealt with that?
So what I think I'm hearing is for the actual lecture, it's pre-recorded, and then the Q&A is what happens live, and I assume the speaker is there.
Yep.
And so, I don't necessarily, especially if you're in a situation, I haven't done it. We haven't done it. We usually do them live, although we always offer the recorded presentation link afterwards for the audience who couldn't attend or want to see it again or want to slow down and pause. But I mean, if you wait till the to the end to have questions, and as long as the speaker is there, I don't see that there's a major difference to having it pre-recorded in that scenario, unless there is an opportunity to, answer and ask live survey questions that you might want to incorporate. So it just depends on the situation, but I don't necessarily see that it would be, especially if it's well done and again the speaker's there.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing, and Mark, I'm gonna get your thoughts on this too, but Linda, just responding to your, I would agree with you, and I guess I only precaution, I guess, for Alan and the others that have asked this. I think a part of that depends on a couple of different things. That first of all, how technical is it? And two, how long is this? If you're expecting me to sit in front of a 1 hour pre-recorded video, what a snore fest that's going to be, right? I mean, that's going to be very boring. And I think one of the richness of sharing scientific information is the engagement with the audience. And if you've got technical information you're trying to share, I don't know, label change or something that impacts the scope of medicine and how we're going to prescribe something, I might want to inject questions right then and there when you're covering a topic. Linda, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It depends if you were to have a long pre-recorded, an hour-long, as you said, pre-recorded event that we had to get through. I mean, I think the advantages of live is that you adjust to situations, and having to sit through a pre-recorded event knowing that you can't do anything until after it's done, that could get awkward for sure. And so in those situations where you might have to optimize the use of your speaker and have pre-recorded, you might send out the link and allow people to look at it ahead of time, especially if the speaker, again, is available. And that's the key. I mean, he needs to be there. And so the ideal situation is to have it live.
Yep. Mark, any thoughts on this, one way or the other?
No, I from what I've seen, for impact and effectiveness in terms of getting the messaging out, I think it's more advantageous for the program if the speaker is live. And I think it goes both to your points of engagement with the audience, being able to address questions, and having that authenticity that you're looking for if you're sponsoring an event, if your corporation sponsoring an event, you want that that holistic feeling of authenticity. So I think it's probably best live from what I've heard and seen.
But make no mistake, if you have a 10-minute video that's exceptionally well done, go for it.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I don't just snippets. Right.
Yep. And I guess that's the point, right? I mean, I think part of it is how long of a video you're wanting me to sit through. Because if it's an hour of like, just send me a link. What's the point of during it, during the conference? But I would think that that the real value is the exchange. So I guess just another question here before I have two other ones that I'd like to ask you guys as well. So Brian has said it's a little long, but we'll try to get through it. It says, and maybe we could just respond to this one quickly as well. Brian has said speakers are also more often giving talks from their homes. This presents a unique and sometimes sensitive situation, providing guidance on background. For example, any tips to handle this? Also, home internet may not be as strong as when they're at their institution. Would providing temporary compensation to upgrade home internet as a preventive action be worth considering? Linda, have you guys dealt with that at all? And what are you doing in terms of coaching around background? I mean, you kind of talked about, what's in your background, but as it relates to what you're coaching to speakers.
So we have not gone so far as to upgrade systems, and a lot of times in a situation where we know that the speaker has the internet at home is not sufficient for an event, a virtual event, then we encourage them to go into their office or somewhere that has better internet service. And if not, we would probably, we'd have to check through legal to make sure we handle it appropriately, but we would potentially look into supporting them, especially if we're going to use them in multiple situations. The other thing is if people just don't have the ability to move, you could either upgrade, but one thing to make sure of is you don't use virtual backgrounds if they don't have good fast internet, because it is weirdly awkward. You look like you're in this weird movie where every movement causes the whole background to kind of shift in this shimmering sort of way. So if you're that in the situation, then you make sure that the speaker is set up where they're have a very benign background. The lighting is appropriate. There are no glares there. I mean, that's the practice session. You do all of that and then make sure that they understand this is what you're doing on the day of the presentation.
Yep. Mark, any thoughts on this?
Well, I agree with Linda from the background perspective, that it can look really weird, make you look like you're in space or something like that. I think the background technology is getting much better now. I think companies are putting much more money into it. So you have the capability to create your own background from one of your pictures, or some of their newer virtual technology backgrounds are much better, and you don't seem to be floating in air. So that's one thing, but I could go either way. The other thing I've heard that companies are doing in terms of the technology, I've heard that a couple of my clients are sending nice headphones as gifts, and it serves two purposes. It gives the speaker a thank you. It's normally under budget and it's approved by compliance. And then number two, it assures that the sound quality can be as strong as possible versus not having a headphone or going through a speaker's personal collection of headphones. So that's what I've seen.
Yep. No, these are some great tips. Let's talk about, we're getting close to time here, but there's a couple other things I think are important here. Let's talk about setting expectations for successful presentations. And I think what we can look at is both from management to MSLs, but also the MSLs engaging with KOLs. Linda, can you give a couple of tips and thoughts on setting expectations for successful presentations?
Yeah, I think when you're setting up the pre-practice sessions, it's important to really walk them through, especially if you've seen them present live and know how they like to present. There's a lot of speakers that tend to ask questions or say, how's everybody doing? Well, you say, how's everybody doing on a virtual environment, and nobody can respond. So it's little things like setting expectations on, if you're going to write out anything, write out your intro, write out your first slide to get past that awkward phase of when you're not used to, having nobody respond to you. So I always encourage and set expectations for the initial awkwardness. And I have even taken to making sure that even if it's verbatim, I've sort of mapped out what I'm going to say for the first few seconds, just because it does come across initially when you're not used to doing it as awkward. And then there's and as I just did, the ums, if you don't practice in the virtual environment, the ums and ohs and so's and and it can get really exacerbated in the virtual environment, because people don't realize how nervous they might get. Not having that feedback is just not normal. Being able to look somebody in the face it's challenging for speakers. So you have to set expectations that it's going to be awkward. Let's practice this, because you want to come across as though you've done this many times, so that people are listening to you and not focused on the idiosyncrasies of your background or your ums and ohs and so's and whatever, your reading list, all of that things. Every little detail counts, because in the end, you want people focused on the message.
Yeah, excellent. I think this is great advice and tips. And I agree with you. I mean, it goes right back to what we were talking about, and you guys have both mentioned multiple times, and I agree. Practice, 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 right? Preparation is absolutely key. Mark, any thoughts on this?
I'll just add two things to that in terms of expectations. I think, as we've mentioned before, it's the length of time that you have to consider in a virtual environment versus an in-person environment. Should you have a shortened keynote when you're hosting these webinars, the medical affairs teams and MSL leaders have to think about that and put themselves in the shoes of not only the presenter, but also the audience. When you have a panel, do you have the effective technology to be able to throw it back to different panelists in real time and have them weigh in on what the keynote speaker is saying, without technology glitches? And I think the last thing in terms of setting expectations, you've got to be ready for the unknown and for real life. I think you've got to be ready for the dogs to bark, between 2 and 4 when the UPS guy comes, a doorbell ringing when the UPS guy or FedEx guy drops off a package. And then whether you have little children, if you have a 6-year-old intern like I do, are you ready for them to walk into the room right in the middle of your presentation? So I think all those are real considerations that MSL leader and team have to anticipate and prepare for in setting and managing expectations for a successful event.
That's a great point, Mark. And I think the new phrase is video bombers versus photo bombers. So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
we've seen a lot of good, funny videos online about the video bombers. And the one thing I forgot to add to this in terms of setting expectations is a lot of times these are physicians, and sometimes they don't realize if they if they inadvertently shut down their screen, whatever's on their desktop could show. So you got to make sure that they close down any PHI, confidential information on their desktop, so that if there is a mistake and that the video is closed down, that whatever's on their desktop is not displaying any type of confidential information or PHI. So that's another thing you have to be mindful of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like the video bombers, but not encourage anybody to do this, but it could end up being a well-watched video. I think about the guy who was on I think it was
Yeah.
CNBC, and his little kid walked in, and now it's been viewed like 1 billion times. And the guy was mortified. He was on live TV, but little kid was like, dun, 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 like so. Don't do that. But it could end up being a good thing. We're about out of time, and I realize everybody who's sent in questions, we didn't get to all of them, and I apologize. We try to get to as many as we can. But I do want to end it with very practical advice, right? Just a very practical tip. Linda, I'm going to start with you. You think about all the challenges you guys have went through and observations and successes you've had from this. What's 1 or 2 quick tips that you can give MSLs or managers out there to make them more successful as it relates to speaker training?
Don't be afraid to ask to practice. I think sometimes MSLs get a little bit awkward with asking high level, especially tier 1 level KOLs to practice. You have to get past that awkwardness. It's critical that they practice. It's critical that they understand that lighting, we're setting them up for success, and everything from lighting, background, noise, tech use, video bombers, confidential information, the way you ask questions. All of these things have to be addressed, even for the most seasoned speakers.
Absolutely. Can we push it a little further and say this would be a requirement if you want to be a speaker for our product? Maybe we make it a requirement that we're going to do at least 1 practice session.
Yeah.
Mark, any final tips or thoughts, things that you've observed or things you want to share?
I think we've covered a lot of them, and I think Linda had a great ending statement there in terms of practicing. I think the thing to do before that is that the MSLs and the medical affairs teams leaders have to have the leadership skills to do interviews and start to understand who are good speakers for this virtual and digital environment. It's not all the same top KOLs that you've used before. I think you might need to look for new rising stars that might be used to this digital environment and can excel in it. So I think that's where it starts with, and then everything else we've talked about probably flows from there. So that would be my last tip.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. We shared and discussed a lot of topics. I think this is one of those areas that might be grossly underutilized right now with MSLs, and MSLs are looking for new ways to add value to KOL relationships. Well, I think speaker training could be certainly one of those areas. And so, Mark, Linda, thank you very much for sharing all of this today. Um, I'm going to once again, I want to thank H1 for being a part of this and sponsoring and partnering with us today. Our next installment of MSL Insights will take place on Friday, September 18th, 2020 at 1 p.m. Eastern. So we're off next week. The registration for the next show will be on our website soon. We'll also make some announcements on LinkedIn as well. Just a reminder, all applications for MSL the Year Awards need to be completed and will close next Wednesday, September 9th. So with that, I'm going to wrap up today's show. I want to thank once again Mark and Linda for being here. We hope that all of you found this to be valuable and useful. Our show will be ongoing, and we have a brief survey. We'd like everyone to participate as soon as we end the webinar. Mark, Linda, on behalf of the MSL Society, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks so much, Sam. Enjoyed it.
Me too.
Thanks, everyone. We'll end here. Thank you.